Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast, conversations in the post-prohibitionist era. And Matthew, it seems like we're actually getting closer to the post-prohibition era every day, don't you think?
I tell you, Joe, there's not a day that goes by anymore. It used to be that I had to go and hunt down stories for us to talk about in the news and like look for interesting things. But now they seem to show up daily.
It's a part of our conversation. Yeah, it's a part of the national conversation, really.
And it's really, I think it's catching attention. Obviously, now it's in the forefront. We're talking about the opioid epidemic and the possibilities for cannabis to be active in that front, the changing legal landscape daily, the federal government sort of being on the fence now about, we're going to let the experiments at the state level happen. All of these things that really indicate that we are on that cusp of just complete and total change.
Now, I went to a fundraiser last night for Cynthia Nixon from Sex and the City, who was running for governor of New York.
That's right.
And she stood and sort of talked about the issues that mattered to her and that were dear to her heart. And one of them was cannabis reform.
Oh, absolutely. It was the first plank in her platform.
She is solid about it. And she is solid about social justice issues. And she's solid about getting people out of jail and fixing their records. So it's very interesting to hear a candidate running for a governor of this state, certainly, just being completely upfront about it. Well, no hesitation.
I have a question for you then, Joe.
What is it?
As a visitor there, as somebody in the audience, does she have a plan? Did they lay it out? Did they explain what they want to do? Or it's just all pie in the sky right now?
No, it wasn't pie in the sky. It was a fundraiser. She seems to know the issue fairly clearly. I would love a chance to sit down with her and really talk to her in depth about it. You and I have asked. We know we've put it out to her campaign. We haven't heard back yet. So if somebody here knows Cynthia, please tell her to call us.
Get her on the line.
It's easy to find us.
Especially now. I think she needs a little bit more help. I read an article today that said that actually Hillary Clinton has thrown her weight behind incumbent Governor Cuomo.
She's not. That's not a big surprise.
So let's see if we can draw some attention back to the legal cannabis candidate in the race.
Okay, Cynthia, call us. What else is going on in the news, Matthew?
Well, let's get into it. Joe, since we're talking about New York, here's an interesting piece of New York cannabis news. And this comes from the office of Bill de Blasio, whom, after this announcement, my friend cleverly renamed Bill de Blasio.
The mayor of New York.
Maybe a bit of a stretch. But he has issued a statement in which he says, quote, "I'm calling on the New York Police Department to, instead of making arrests when someone is caught smoking pot, they should instead issue a summons." So this is stopping arresting people for smoking pot in New York City.
It is about time. It's about time to stop putting a siege on communities where these arrests happen all the time.
Absolutely.
Come on.
Interestingly, it's been decriminalized for a long time, and it's been up to the discretion of officers whether or not the person in question would actually be arrested or just issued a summons. But they found last year, and we're talking about 2017 at this point, that 86% of people who were actually arrested versus being issued a court summons were of Black or Hispanic descent.
Okay, we're not surprised, but we are disappointed that this is continuing, and it's time to stop.
Yeah, it's very clear that the suggestion of summons over arrest was applied in a very racist and double standard fashion. Young white people whom are consuming cannabis in mass numbers in Brooklyn. I can tell you for a fact.
We know for a fact. Get a slap on the hand, or not even.
They walk.
They just walk.
And sometimes it's a $50 ticket. I have a friend who's collected a small collection of these $50 tickets to his name. And yet, if you were Black or brown, it was cuffs on, back of the car, off to the station.
Black or brown equals ticket to Orange.
Yeah. A big problem, but this is a great and very firm statement from our mayor to say, look, we're going to address this. We're going to bring it to an end.
It is time. What else is happening?
Interesting development on something that we wanted to talk about last week, but could not quite process. And I got an update on this, which was the court case that was heard by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in regards to the Schedule 1 status of CBD. Now, this is something that
the
is
act of insanity. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion as to what this meant prior, what it means now, and basically how it boils down is this. In 2016, the DEA set a rule that established inside the Controlled Substances Act the drug code for a marijuana extract. That's how it's listed in the code. And this says that anything that could be derived from marijuana is part and parcel to marijuana and therefore is restricted as a Schedule 1 substance. Now, this was challenged before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to say that CBD, which we know has medical benefit, so disqualifying it from Schedule 1, and we also know can be extracted from industrial hemp and not from traditional cannabis. They put forward a proposal that says, hey, this rule needs to be overturned and CBD needs to be exempted from its Schedule 1 status. Now, what actually ended up happening is that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals punted. They said it is not within their purview because these organizations, specifically the Hemp Industries Association, had an opportunity in 2016 to air their grievance with the DEA's rule. And because that window of opportunity has come and gone, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just refused to hear the case. So effectively what that means is currently still at a federal level in the United States, CBD is a Schedule 1 illegal substance.
Amazing, right? So, but it's only in name at this point because really no one in the industry that I know is terribly concerned about this. I have not heard a murmur of worry, a murmur of concern.
Well, there was a small rash of DEA action. There were a few facilities that were raided, a few places in California. I know just last week we spoke with Mr. Hunter who got wrapped up in a raid that was actually, counter to what state law allows for. And so this was a concern, was that knowing that there's a lot of people in the CBD business, that they're now, potential targets for DEA action, which is a bit true. So if the DEA wanted to get rough and tumble with CBD producers out there, they could technically
it's like
do so.
arresting manufacturers of aspirin.
Yeah, it's really a raw deal. But
really silly.
There is some action out there. There's a lot more reading that you can do. There are some petitions that you can sign. I would say for listeners who want to get involved to do their research and look into the Hemp Industries Association, who are still actively appealing this process, not only leveraging language that's in the Farm Bill that says cultivation of industrial hemp is now legal and associating their CBD extraction from industrial hemp. But definitely there's a lot of stuff out there and there's a lot of opportunities out there for people to get involved to help sway this argument in the favor of just legalization.
It's ridiculous.
On a little bit lighter note.
Let's lighten it up a little bit. Yeah.
How about this? Everybody is, of course, talking about the royal wedding. And
we have our 2 cents to add to the royal wedding.
What do you think about the royal wedding? Do you care?
I could care less. But I'm hoping they're happy and it's, a lot of energy and a lot of attention.
Well, interestingly enough,
tell me our 2 cents.
People are getting involved in the royal wedding and a nephew of now Princess Meghan Markle has named a strain of cannabis that he has cultivated and grown.
And it is called?
In her honor, the Markle Sparkle.
Oh, I love Markle Sparkle.
We're going to have to see if we can get our hands on some. But Grants Pass medical marijuana grower Tyler Dooley and his partners have custom genetically bred a strain of cannabis. It's a high sativa dominant called Markle Sparkle. He will be entering it into the Cannabis Cup here in just a few weeks, I believe. And we'll see how it does.
What kind of royal accolades it gets.
Well, hopefully it can get you royally high. Hey listeners, we hope that you are enjoying the Brave New Weedcast. We're happy to bring you new episodes every opportunity we can. You know what you could do for us? You could share the Brave New Weedcast with somebody else who might be interested. I'm sure you have friends, maybe family, who have experienced pain, stress, anxiety. Who knows? Please, if you think you can help, share the podcast with them. We'd love to welcome them to the Brave New Weed world.
Our show this week is taking on a topic that within the cannabis world is a controversial one, and that's the topic of dabbing. Dabbing gets a really bad rap. It's seen as a frat boy enterprise. It's people. For those of you who don't know, it's taking a very concentrated smidgen of oil. I love that word, smidgen, and at a very high heat, inhaling it, and you're getting a very highly potent hit of both THC and CBD in the case of certain strains. But say a high strain has 30% THC. That's very high, right? A dab is like 80 to 90%. It can make your mind feel like you're burning, like it's burning. Now, it has some very interesting uses, however. It has some interesting uses medically, and it has some other interesting uses. Many people feel that it's a cleaner, healthier way to smoke because you're not really smoking. You're not taking in plant material. You're only taking essential elements, and you therefore are putting a very small amount of inhaled vapor into your lungs.
Right. Scientifically speaking, we're talking about sublimation here, right? The nail is so hot that it's not combusting. It's just a specific
it's melting
change
oils.
from
it's melting
oil
oils.
directly into
Exactly.
vapor.
So our two guests tonight, we had two separate interviews. One is with Mara Gordon, who's been on the show before, who is a creator of medical cannabis oils and is an advocate of dabbing for certain conditions, including high pain and certain other conditions. And it's her approach is very interesting, and I think it's well worth hearing. The other is Roger Volodarsky, who has created a beautiful version of what's called a dab rig. In the past, these things were big columns with titanium nails that you actually had to heat with a blowtorch. This looked like crack. This was not good for the future of marijuana image, okay? His company has created beautiful machine that has won prizes all around the world. Many people are calling it the iPad of the cannabis industry, or the iPhone, the iDab, if you will. And glass artists all around the world are blowing components that can be fit upon the machine itself. So you can really customize your own rig. So let's listen to these two folks talk about dabbing, and let's see if we can get another perspective and shed a little more light on the issue.
And hello, Mara. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Joe?
Same. Very well, thank you. I really want to jump right into the topic of medical dabbing, please, because dabbing gets a bad rap in the medical marijuana community. Do you agree with me?
Absolutely. Okay, I say we were at Patients at a Time over the weekend in New Jersey, and speaker after speaker talked about the bad things about dabbing, and I was just so frustrated, listening to them making just this broad statements without going into any of the specifics of it and some of the benefits when done right.
Yeah, so why in the medical community do you think dabbing gets such a bad rap?
Well, there's several reasons. I would say the first reason is when dabbing was first getting any kind of into people's consciousness, it was the vision of the not medical patient, not the medical use. It was the straight recreational user walking around with their butane torch and their butane extracted or hexane extracted shatter or oils that they were dabbing. And so they were getting a lot of poisons and chemicals, and they were doing it in such a way that it wasn't about doing it, getting a specific dose, and then when it wears off, then doing it again. It was about doing it in a very drug-like manner, if I can say that, where it seemed to be like just over and over and over doing more and more and more without any sense of what the actual dose was.
When the first time I saw dabbing, I could not take the idea of crack out of my mind. I saw a gigantic rig. It was about 3 feet tall, a massive column that they lit a titanium nail with a very large blowtorch, which turned orange. And then they stuck the concentrate on top of it and inhaled this massive column of smoke that, when exhaled, seemed to hit the other wall of the room. Am I correct? Is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. That's the same picture I'm talking about. The first time I saw it, it was a group of guys and a couple of gals. And I mean, I don't mean to be perpetuating any stereotypes here, but covered in tattoos and piercings, not exactly what I think of when I think of a medical cannabis patient because of my own stereotypes, of course. But sitting there on a picnic table at an event, passing it around with this big giant, butane torch that looked like something that you would have, if you were a welder, not somebody who was taking medicine.
Yes. So that's where we started with dabbing. Tell me how medical dabbing differs from recreational dabbing, if you will.
Well, I use dabbing in a context that may be slightly different than that. In that I believe that the vaporizer devices that are out there now, where you can take a specific amount of oil and add them to the coil and then use that and take a puff off of that, where you know exactly what you're getting and how much, that is a dab as well. Using some of the electronic devices now that you can use, where you eliminate any of the toxic fumes from butane, etc. There's all sorts of different devices to use. The best part about dabbing now, though, with what I mean in the medical sense, is the fact that you can control a dose for very, very quick onset and a shorter lasting lifespan than it would be if you took something sublingually or as an edible. So you can get very, very fast and very specific results and have it be repeatable. The same way that when you smoke, you get the highest bioavailability, but it's very short lasting. Move that from a flower where you really can't predict how much you're getting to something where you take the whole thing in one dose and you know exactly what you're getting. If I put 10 milligrams, if I put 10 milligrams worth of concentrate on something and I dab it and I heat it and I inhale it as one time, I know that I had 10 milligrams of that cannabinoid. Versus like on a flower, you just can't do that because, which part of it did you get? How much did you smoke? How many hits did you take? How long did you hold it, et cetera? It's a much more complex mathematical problem that can't be solved without all sorts of additional equipment to see aspiration, et cetera. So it just seems like with dabbing, you get very, very quick, very accurate, and the predictability of it is what I really like. I know that, for example, that if I have a patient who's and this is something that I ask patients to do on a regular basis that have insomnia as a result of chronic pain or just insomnia or sleep disorders in general, they can take a medicine sublingually and, expect to have 6 to 8 hours of benefit from it. But do they sit and wait 2 hours or an hour, or the unpredictability of how long it's going to take effect? They can take a dab, a small micro amount or small amount of that same medicine and take it right up front and get immediate results and go to sleep and have the other take effect while they're asleep. The other thing is if they're having severe pain and they can't get on top of it, which happens in severe pain, your choices are, if you're on opioids, is more opioids. And we all know that opioids are fine for acute pain, but don't do much for chronic at all. But they can take a dab and get immediate results from it that'll give them a respite while they allow either cannabis or other medicines, whichever it is they're using, to take effect for a longer term full body. Sometimes you just have to give a person a break from the suffering.
you talk about being able to measure the dab. How do you really measure such a small, minute amount? I mean, a dab is about, what, the size of a quinoa seed, would you say, a standard dab? How are you able to really measure that into milligrams?
Well, it's just math. I mean, if you have well, first of all, the way we have our medicine is in syringes that are marked. And so if you have the lab results and you know how many milligrams is in a gram, then it's just looking at, I'm taking, if it's a tiny little amount, let's say it's one hash mark on something if you're on a 1 gram syringe, it's going to be a very, very tiny amount. When people talk about like a grain of rice, as a way of measuring, which of course is, what kind of rice is it? But when they talk about that, we convert that over to 0.05 grams. And so that's where we've standardized what a grain of rice is. So you might not be able to get it down to the exact milligram, but frankly, the dabbing is not for people who are hypersensitive or super sensitive that would be adversely impacted by 2 or 3 or even 5 milligrams too much. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not for the people who take 1 milligram and they can't get up off the sofa.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, you said you like certain electronic devices. I know when we were at the conference, we were dabbing, actually. You were doing it for your pain. And you were using a really interesting, almost a handheld device. What's the name of it and how does it work?
Yes, this device is one that I was introduced to me about a year ago at a yoga retreat where I was participating. Yoga and cannabis, another interesting side topic. But anyway, they introduced this to me and I was just like, well, the first thing that they said to me, which was interesting, is this device has never worked as well as it works with your oils. And I was like, great. Let me try it. And I tried it and it was transformative. I took the electric nail and the device with the water pipe that I had been using before and put it in a cupboard and haven't looked at them since. This device, it's called the Dipper or Dipstick. I think that they call the Dipstick as the website or whatever. And it is one where you can either put the medicine in the device, just like the other ones where you put it on the coil, you close the top and you inhale it out of the top, or my preferred, which is where I put the exact amount that I want, and then I dip the device directly, along the edges of it until I get to the center and get the full dose. And I can do that in as many or as many or as few inhalations as I wish. I really feel like it gives great control to the person using it over the experience. Besides the fact that you can control the temperature, which is always important, and you want to keep the temperature as low as possible. But it also eliminates the having it too much or not having it be enough, because you can see right there how much you're taking. So I will measure out of a syringe that's measured, this is the amount I want, and then I either take it or don't take it. And then I can see visually whether I've gotten it or not. So that's very beneficial.
And so what is the ideal temperature, by the way? You said low, meaning what, 340?
I actually like it a little bit less than that. Now, this one doesn't have the sophistication of a dial-up like you would have on a volcano or something where you can dial it in. When I say low, I mean it's got like the typical green, blue, red, and I recommend keeping it at the green, which is the lowest. Now, our oils are already decarboxylated, which means they've already been heated and activated as THC, CBD, the carboxyl molecule's been eliminated already. So it doesn't have to be as hot. One of the reasons that a lot of these devices have to be so hot is they have to be able to convert, and ours are already converted. So that takes care of that and allows us to keep the temperature cooler. But one thing I want to mention is a lot of the reason that this is also so good, and you didn't ask, but you're going to, I bet, is the vaporizer devices that are out there now, a lot of them, they only burn oils efficiently that have had something added to them because concentrates are just too thick to burn in a vaporizer pen. They end up adding things that are carcinogenic, like propylene glycol that converts to formaldehyde in your lungs, when it's heated, or vegetable glycerin, which is carcinogenic, or MCT, and you don't want to take fats into your lungs, or even adding terpenes, which makes it kind of funky and not really the optimal for what the profile of the medicine is.
Interesting. I mean, this is a device that costs only $150, so I think it's good value as well. Do you agree?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I mean, it seems kind of funny because here I am, this grandmother talking about, promoting dabbing. But when it's the name, it's like, it's kind of like when I, got into this and people were talking about weed and pot and dope and all those things. And it's like, you can call them whatever you want, but it's cannabis and it's medicine at the end of the day. And we might call this dabbing and it have the picture evoked in your mind of the heavy user, very druggy, very paraphernalia-like, that's kind of an ugly visual. But in the reality is the effect of it and the benefit of it is profoundly medical.
Well, especially if you're in any sort of pain, you want that heavy hit of relief immediately. So, some people have been...
Or nauseous.
Well, yes, indeed. Lots of things, I'm sure. A lot of people have posited, and only sort of posited, the idea that these steady influxes of high levels of cannabinoid might sort of unbalance the endocannabinoid system. What's your response to something like that?
Well, I think that when you do something medically, when I or any of our patients are using a product medically, they're using a therapeutic dose, and that's where it stops. There's a need for it. So I'm not concerned what it's doing on a negative to the endocannabinoid system, whether it's, it's not like steroids that your adrenals stop working on their own and you go off of steroids and all of a sudden you have, crisis in your adrenal system. It's not like that. I don't think that there's been any definitive evidence that I've seen in any scientific studies that show that the regular intake of high levels of THC is going to impact negatively when you stop. I mean, you might have a little bit of anxiety and sleeplessness for a couple of days while your body reacclimates, but that's about as bad as it gets. I think the rest is just fear mongering. And if you have somebody who's truly suffering, and you say to them, but I'm concerned about what it's going to do to long-term to your endocannabinoid system, my response is, well, in the meantime, you expect me to suffer? And I would way rather have somebody use dabbing to eliminate some of this suffering than using opioids that have tremendous negative side effects and potential dangerous repercussions.
As you yourself only know too well.
Absolutely.
Tell me something. How often a day would you, if you're in a high pain situation, how many times a day, how many dabs a day might you use?
Well, I'll tell you my day today. I have been, since I got back from New York on Sunday night, I have had a horrific headache that I have just not been able to get rid of. And so I took a tiny, tiny little dose, maybe 5 milligrams this morning. And it was enough to be able to get me going, get my day, continue to operate, look at my emails, start answering phone calls, go to meetings, all those sorts of things. And after my work day is finished, I will take one more about that size. It's not enough that I even feel it. I just feel better. And then before I go to bed, I'll take about 3 times that amount. I'll dab. I usually take 3 tiny little puffs, and then I'm able to go to sleep. And while I'm asleep, the medicine that I've taken sublingually takes effect, so I sleep through the night.
I think I'm going to call you Grandma Dabber. Anyway.
Yeah, so 2 to 3 times a day. And when I'm having a really great day, I only do it before bed. So it's not like, oh, I'm awake in the morning, I take my medicine for my allergies and my asthma, and I'm going to take my dab. No, I don't do it that way. I use it for breakthrough. It's an adjunct. It's not part of the standard.
Understood. I want to ask you, for those who aren't aware of how to look for a good oil to consume, what would you say are the benchmarks, and how would you advise people to shop for oils before they use them?
Oh, that's such a good question, Joe. Besides obviously telling them they should use ours if they're in California, because we started ours because of the dearth of quality out there. But now, fortunately, there are some other products that are not quite as sketchy as what was available previously. The first thing I would say is make sure you stay away from any hydrocarbons, butane, hexane, propane. Oh my God, I went to a wedding where everybody was coughing. And finally I said to the bride, what is going on? She goes, oh, they're all dabbing over there. And I was like, what oil? She goes, oh, it's made with propane. It's like, good Lord. So you cook your burgers and then you make your medicine? It's crazy. But you want to make sure, back to your question, that you're staying away from any of the hydrocarbons. I think that you want to make sure that you see lab results and that shows that there is no residual solvent present. Because even ethanol, which is the best form to use, you shouldn't take ethanol into your lungs. That can be very dangerous. CO2 is going to have a little bit of that freezer burn taste. And frankly, most of the CO2 products out there are so Frankensteined with, added terpenes and added this and added that I would say stay away from them. Stay away from anything that's been made with isopropyl alcohol, because that's poison. And it does leave residual. So, just think about the actual solvent that's used to make the product. So that's the first thing is to look at the solvent. Also, you're going to want to make sure that there's no pesticides, heavy metals, molds, mildews, aflatoxins, mycotoxins, that sort of thing within the product itself. So the same thing that you would expect as a high level for anything that you're going to ingest, you're going to want for anything that you're going to dab, with the added that it has to be sure that it's something that cannot go in your lungs. Like you can eat ethanol. You have to have a lot of it to have it be toxic. You shouldn't take really very much at all into your lungs without it being a problem. So it's making sure that the medicine is very, very clean. And if you can get it where it's been decarboxylated already, better, because you can keep the temperature lower.
Will it say it on the package if it's in the packaging if it's decarboxylated?
It should, because it should say either THCA if it's not, or if it says THC. That's one of the things that, like, you go to a dispensary. I'm not sure. I haven't been I haven't been in very many dispensaries in the last year or so, and certainly not since January. But one of the things that always bothered me was that it'll say THC CBD even on flowers, when the reality is it's THCA and CBDA. And that's because if it had been heated, it wouldn't be a flower anymore. It'd be burned. So it's when it converts, there's even a formula you have to use. It doesn't even convert 1-to-1. It's like 0.88 or something. But you should be able to tell if you're looking at an oil. The other thing is the color of it will be a little bit darker. Beta caryophyllene is one of the most prominent terpenes that we find in a lot of flowers. And it's actually a very, very beneficial one because of its ability to activate the CB2 receptors, which is, one of the rare things to have it not be a cannabinoid and be able to activate these receptors. But beta caryophyllene, when it's heated, it turns kind of a reddish color. So if it's a pale yellow or gold, it's raw. If it's going to have a little bit more of a dark amber into the reds and then down into the browns, it's going to be decarboxylated. If it's very green, it's going to have too much plant material and you're going to want to stay away from it for dabbing.
Definitely. I thought all concentrates were heated. Am I incorrect in the processing of them?
No, because CO2 is not decarboxylated. Butane is not decarboxylated. unless they do it specifically for ingestion, like what they call, when you think of a concentrate that's being sold in a little container, like a little round container for dabbing, they are usually not decarboxylated at all. When they are in a syringe and they're being used for more of like a cancer patient or something like that, then they are decarboxylated. That's not 100% rule, but it's a pretty close one.
Mara, what about dabbing CBD? We've talked a lot about THC, but what about CBD that's not psychoactive? Can you dab it?
Yeah, I'm going to argue with you real quickly, though, about it not being psychoactive, because CBD definitely has psychoactivity associated with it for many people. I have a patient that I talked to today that can't get off the sofa with the CBD. It just keeps knocking her out, and there's no THC in that product. So we can't just use such a broad brush to paint that CBD has no psychoactivity. It also has to do with the dose. But getting back to your question, dabbing CBD.
Well, you're very reprimanded on that one. So, what kind of a dose is said patient using of CBD?
She's using about 100 milligrams a day, but she's also fighting breast cancer. So she has to have a higher dose. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not a megadose. I wouldn't say that's a megadose.
No, that's not a megadose. I'm one of those people that uses CBD and it makes me feel like I'm jumping out of my skin. So it's like, I believe it's like a third, a third, and a third. A third of the people don't feel it. A third of the people feel sleepy, and a third of people feel too activated. And so is that technically psychoactivity the way we think of THC? No, but it's definitely feeling altered. So I just want to throw that around, because otherwise what ends up happening is you have the general public thinking, oh, THC is the one to get high and CBD is the medicine. And that's just not the truth at all.
Absolutely. Agree.
Yeah.
No. Yes.
Right. And so THC, one of the things that's nice, to have CBD around in an oil also is for a rescue, in particular. Also for using it for, if I was one of the people, the third of the people that doesn't feel adversely impacted when I use CBD, I would have used it this morning for my headache instead of the THC, perhaps. But because I didn't have to feel the THC too much anyway, I just went ahead. But on the CBD, in instances where people have taken too much THC, whether they've smoked too much or they've taken that edible that said it was 10 milligrams and it was really 100 milligrams, or it was 10 milligrams and their ability is to take a third of a milligram or something like that, their dose was too high, and they're feeling paranoid and freaked out and all the things that are adverse effects potentially of THC, you can dab a little bit of the CBD and get an immediate relaxation of those adverse effects, especially if somebody's feeling very shaky from the THC or very paranoid or nervous. It'll bring them down very, very quickly. And dabbing's the fastest way to do that without having to go find some CBD flower, find a device, and smoke it.
What else about dabbing? Anything else we need to talk about and discuss? Medical cannabis dabbing with Mara Gordon from Aunt Zelda's here.
I just want people not to be afraid of it, and I want people to understand that it can be a very important part of their adjunct therapy. You're going to physical therapy. You know that every time you do this, you struggle with a particular part of it because it's very difficult and it's very taxing and you have a hard time. You can do a tiny dab. You can do an hour and a half of physical therapy and have it wear off before you got to get back in your car and drive home. And so it has so many different benefits, not only from the immediate effect, but the short-term effect of it. So it's worth experimenting. I don't have any kind of personal involvement in promoting Dipstick or the Dipper, but I do have a code if anybody wants to try it and get a discount they can use. Just put Aunt Zelda's in the code and they get I think it's a 10% discount, which, in this day and age, every penny helps.
That's a very nice promotion. Thank you. Last question. What if it's not called dabbing? What should it be called? You want to change the
Well,
image?
the thing about it is I tend to be a bit wordy. I think I had something like combustible, vaporization, blah blah blah. I mean, I'm not very good at naming things. So I don't know that I'm the one, but I really think it's just, I like dipping better than dabbing. So let's call it dipping. We're dipping.
All right. Think of me the next time you dip. Will you please?
I will. I say I'm going to go dip now. No, I'm kidding.
You go dip. But listen, thanks for your insight. And I think this is a topic that most medical cannabis people will not broach. I'm really pleased that you spent the time to talk about it with us. Thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Joe. Always happy to help.
Hey listeners, we want to thank you guys for joining us each and every episode, and we want you to know that we're listening to you too. Please email us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com with any of your comments, questions, or anything, just to say hi. We'd love to hear from you.
Roger, thanks for joining on the Brave New Weed podcast.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So you have built an empire out of dabbing equipment. Is that correct, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit too early to call it an empire, but we have done quite well in the concentrated cannabis space, yes.
I'm very optimistic for your success. Tell me what got you interested in this, because you were sort of an early adopter as far as I can tell. You started in around 2013, which is, I think, just about when dabbing came into what one might call the cannabis mainstream. How'd you get started?
So I'm a born and bred New Yorker, and I remember very specifically in 2012 when, load your own wax pens, as they were calling it back then, hit the scene. And as a New Yorker who's always had to hide his use and do it inside, and consuming publicly was just never an option, I was now liberated. And I started buying a bunch of these wax pens for me and my friends, and I just became this early adopter and ambassador because I just love the freedom of being a New Yorker, being able to consume where I want. And so after kind of doing this for a year, a friend of mine said, why don't you create your own company? And I knew little enough about product development at the time to say, yeah, sure, why not? And that's, shortly after I bought PuffCo.com and started his journey.
What was your background? What were you doing before you became a vapor king?
I've been a bit of a serial entrepreneur. I had my own first business at 21 years old. I've kind of tried everything, but I've always been a bit heavier of a focus in sales and marketing. I've also been a bit of a consumer electronics geek my whole life. So definitely far from an engineer, but somebody who always loved learning about new consumer products and was always ready to try something new and challenging.
Okay, so let's talk honestly. The first time I saw dab, it was early 2013. It was about a dab rig I'm talking about. It was about 3 feet tall, this fat column of glass. And the guys who were showing me this thing had a huge blowtorch that they were firing up a titanium nail, turning it orange. And then they were sucking down these enormous quantities of concentrate. I didn't know what to think. I mean, I'm not exactly a naif, but I was a little appalled. I thought at first, oh, this feels a lot like crack. And then it's like, I kept, how much can they take of this stuff? How much can their minds and bodies and brains take? Were you a little surprised when you first saw big, full-scale dabbing?
So I saw it happening before I tried it. I remember my first time trying it was myself in New York. I went and I found the only available device I could do it with, which was if you can remember those swing arm titanium things. It kind of like has this metal plate hanging below a dome. Anyways, I put a regular flame lighter to it and dropped it down and barely got any vapor. And then once I made it to California, I had the experience that you had. And that hurt. It knocked the wind out of me. It got me close to throwing up. And then I had one of the most intense highs I've ever had in my entire life. And so for me, dabbing was something that I really had to ease into. I enjoyed the fact that as someone with a high tolerance, now I can get to a place I haven't been to since, I was a novice in this. But it was such an intimidating and painful process. It wasn't until low temperature dabs came in that I was like, oh, this is pleasant. And I actually started consuming more dabs than I was conventional flower.
Yeah, I did. If you read my book, you will see that actually my first dab did make me vomit, and that it was a sort of a response that continued over a number of years, which was very perplexing to almost everybody I know, including me. Believe me. Where did dabbing go on? Please.
No, go ahead. I was just saying, geez, that sounds like a terrible, terrible experience to keep going back to.
Oh, it was really terrible. It took me a long time to even go near a concentrate again because I didn't know what had caused it. And it's definitely whacked out my system for a good number of years. It's very inexplicable. But enough about me. Tell me how did dabbing begin? How did this whole process begin?
So I don't have a huge amount of the history. I have the history that I've been told. And as far as I know, people have been taking dabs since in, the early 2000s is when I really hear people saying, yep, I took my first one back then. And we had just blown some butane through a bunch of weed and it kind of made this oil. And I think they were calling it honey oil at the time. And yeah, you had to freebase it to get it to work. And I stepped in really when the titanium nails existed. So there are already solutions on the market being made so you can take a dab more easily than I don't know if you remember, but you used to have to torch this glass nail and then put a dome on top and then carefully place your oil in the center of this very, very hot nail. It was a mess. And when I stepped in, it wasn't as much of a mess. So the period in between that, I'm not really familiar with. But I do know when I stepped in, it very quickly went from, domeless nails to ceramic nails to quartz nails to a company called Mothership makes these things called honey buckets that are these swing arm nails, but in a new style. And it just was this exploding ancillary market, all designed for something most people hadn't heard of. And that's kind of what really made me fall in love is I couldn't believe there was this whole community of cannabis users that was almost like this small inner circle of people. That kind of blew my mind. Like how does this exist? I'm the biggest stoner I know. How is there a community and a type of cannabis that I've never even heard of or used? So that's what I stepped into. And I saw it grow very quickly year over year from 2012 to now.
Yeah, it's exploded. From what I understand, concentrates the largest growing segment of the market, which is pretty fascinating if you don't live in any of the legal states. Feels like a whole other world. Let's talk about the machines you've developed. I mean, your latest one, the Peak, is really a thing of beauty. People have called it the iPhone of cannabis, or compared it to the iPhone of cannabis, because the design is so high. Congratulations on that. What possessed you? How long did it take to develop? What's special about it? Let's talk about it, please.
So, my story with cannabis is that I've always been a flower smoker. I started using concentrates somewhere between 2011 and 2012 when wax pen, just before wax pens kind of hit the scene. And all I started to do was kind of vape and smoke flower. Once I found out what a dab was, went through the painful process of learning how to do it on my own, and then was able to have a positive experience with it, I fell in love. From 2015 until I think the very end or early 2017, I probably smoked less than 1 ounce of flowers. All I did was dab. And the change came because I quit smoking cigarettes and, I just needed to smoke something again. But once I went through that almost 2-year period of only consuming concentrates, my relationship with cannabis changed. It went from being something that I could only do at the end of the day. I had to be somewhat careful with how I used because it can make me slow, a little bit dumb, trip me up a bit throughout the day or get me tired. Dabbing was this new thing that gives you energy. You know, you shouldn't do it right before you go to sleep because you won't be able to go to sleep. It flipped my relationship on its head. And now I'm using something that feels like it enhances my day and gives me clarity. And I stopped using my vape pens as much, and I stopped using flour as much. And now my main form of consumption is something I don't make or innovate in. I'm just a consumer in my favorite form of consuming. And that's where the race kind of began of how do we make something that is not only making the best ease of use product for us, where we don't have to use a torch anymore, we just click a button, but how do we make it beautiful and approachable so new people that would have never picked up a torch can see how amazing concentrates are, and that it, in fact, for I think most people, will be the preferred method of consumption, so long as the technology allows you to consume easily. And so that's what drove us. We wanted to, one, make our lives easier by having something easy to use, and two, invite new people into this process by removing the torch and making it beautiful.
Do you think that removing the plant matter from cannabis, just leaving the oil, creates that different experience that you've described? Because what you're describing is my experience also.
So we're actually discussing this internally a lot these days. My hypothesis, I don't know if you should listen to me about it or not, is that it's actually when you dab, most people are leaving behind reclaim, what we call reclaim. It's once you've completed your dab, the brown, kind of gross looking stuff that's left at the end of it. Well, that gross looking stuff is chock full of CBN, the cannabinoid. And that cannabinoid is known for getting you sleepy, tired, hungry, kind of the parts that, you know, especially as a larger guy, haven't been my favorite parts of using cannabis. They have huge medicinal benefits for people, but it's not for me. And so what I found is that when I'm consuming in a way where I happen to be leaving behind all of the CBN, I am more uplifted. I'm getting the THCA and the THCV and all of the parts that uplift my mood and make my day better, and none of the parts that slow me down. But that's just a theory we have going on internally of why dabbing so much better to do when you need clarity.
It is an interesting theory. CBN is a byproduct. For those who don't know, it's a byproduct of combustion. It's a byproduct of heating the plant. It does make you sleepy. People who have insomnia use it to sleep, and it's very effective. I'm going to have to look into that. I don't really know the answer, and I don't know why it would be left behind when you're dabbing. It's very interesting. I've always thought there was something in the leaf itself. So this is an area that we're just going to have to investigate a little bit more. You're going to have to put your top minds to that one, Roger, and let me know the answer.
I will. I mean, it kind of makes sense to us because CBN is the byproduct of combusted THC. When the combustion is over and the temperature is still not at a high enough temperature to vaporize the CBN, we kind of assume that it just being left in the bowl is what's making the pleasant so experience. But it is something we're going to keep looking into, and I would love to throw you an update once we have certified proof that this is the case.
What is the temperature of your? What is the temperature that a dab is consumed at?
It varies. So people go from what I've seen, as high as 700 to 800 degrees. That has led to the really negative experience that I've encountered, that you've encountered. Some people prefer that as a way to consume. Our device only goes from 450 to, I believe, 600 to 650 degrees. So we try to keep it as low as possible. And the higher setting is there really to make up for if you're taking a larger dab and you're just putting more mass into the bowl. But if you kind of follow the range of matching the temperature to the amount you put in, you'll always end up around 500 to 550 degrees, which is where we believe the sweet spot for consuming is.
That's so interesting. Was just speaking with a medical cannabis provider, and she produces decarboxylated concentrates. And the burn temperature is about 340, if not lower. So we think, anyway. Am I correct about that or incorrect?
The burning temperature is 340 degrees for decarboxylated THC.
Yeah, what do you think? Is that correct or incorrect?
I don't think I'm the authority to say whether it's correct or incorrect. I was on Project CBD just yesterday as we were having this CBN conversation, and we were looking up the boiling points, and I believe that they range anywhere from 350 to 415. So that seems to be the lowest minimum amount that you can put in there. What we are putting in there, though, at times is stuff like ice wax. And ice wax, for those who don't know, is kind of like old school hash. It's separated by water, and it is literally just the trichomes of the plant separated from the plant. Well, those need to be burned in a unique way because the trichome waxes are still attached, kind of holding all of the magic inside of the trichome. So if you're going at just 400 degrees, you may not be vaporizing it at a high enough temperature to really enjoy it, which is why we always shoot a little bit higher. But have you actually had a chance to try the product yet?
I sit and I look at it in admiration every day, but I have not been able to use it yet, simply because I don't have the concentrate at my disposal to use it with.
Yes.
But I do admire it. It sits on my shelf looking like a beautiful thing, and it attracts an awful lot of compliments. People want to know, what is this device? I'm talking about the Peak, is your newest product.
Sure, yeah.
Did you design it? Who designed that product?
It's definitely a joint effort of our product team here. I had very specific things that I wanted to see with the product. The hand feel, it being able to fit into a cup holder. So if you're taking a long trip somewhere, you don't have to throw it into your bag. You could just kind of fit it somewhere in the car while you're going where you're going. That's a conical shape. Those are kind of like things that I knew early on before we kicked off development. And then we have this amazing development team in-house that kind of took all of our wild ideas and made it a product that works. So definitely, I would say I kicked off the vision, but our amazing team here actually made this device that we all now use every day here.
It's beautiful. But what I also thought was interesting is on your website, I saw these variations of glass that different glass blowers, different glass designers or creators are making that fit onto it. So I was thinking you've created the first open source dab device, really. Is that correct? Would you say that's accurate?
Wow. I've never thought to phrase it that way, but yeah, that was a thought the entire time we were building this. So, these devices that we've taken our dabs on for these past few years are better known as rigs in the industry. It's why we categorize our product as a smart rig. And these rigs are made by really world-renowned artists, some of them receiving tens of thousands of dollars for their pieces. And when we were building this, we knew that there was an element to consuming concentrates that was heavily tied into pipe making and the art community and the history of how we have consumed here in the States. What we wanted to do is make a platform where artists can build on top of it. When we started showing it to a few art galleries before its release, their vibe was, glass artists are going to love using this product, but they're never going to put their artwork on top of it. And sure enough, as soon as we released it, about 48 hours to 72 hours after the first shipment, we saw the first piece, unprovoked, that we had not requested. We saw the first piece that an artist put online for sale.
Can you describe what those pieces look like for those who have no idea what we're talking about? Because it's a pretty stunning array of stuff.
Yeah, so anyone listening can actually go to puffco.com/glassopen to see it for themselves. But we had everything from rocket ships to the Statue of Liberty to these amazing tops that recycle water in the most interesting way, to a piece that was dipped in copper, plated over glass that was hand carved. I mean, it's some of the most complex things I've seen in the industry. And I can't tell you how honored I am that they're being made to be used with, our product. That was a dream while developing. We did not think would actually manifest.
Are they all blown glass? Is that what they are?
Yes, all of them are blown in some fashion, but then they all use different techniques on top of that. So, for instance, one of the artists, Ryan Fitt, he blows the shape that he wants to blow, and then he, through a process called sandblasting, carves out the different layers of the piece. So you'll see that it starts by being clear, and then on top of that, there's this green color that illuminates under a black light. And then on top of that is a metal. It looks like it came from, Black Panther. It looks like it's out of Wakanda, like some kind of jewelry. So the processes are, they're blowing it, but they're also putting more work into it than just blowing. They're sandblasting, they're carving, they're electroforming. These are all methods of making glass art that have now been incorporated to be made for our piece.
Roger, on another topic, one of the things that I've never really liked about dabbing is the use of butane or hexane or even propane some people use, which sort of freaks me out because it always strikes me that you can clear a lot of it, but there's always some trace that you may never clear, and it's very hard to know. Does that concern you? And if it does, what do you tend to prefer?
It actually did for a while. When I first tried this, I was a little weirded out, like, butane hash oil, that's what BHO stands for. It weirded me out, but I got past that because the feeling was so good. And then this whole niche of solventless concentrates came in. And solventless is ice wax, like I just mentioned earlier. And it's also something called rosin, which is a way where you squeeze the flour with heat and pressure, and this beautiful oil comes out. So there was this whole way of now getting concentrates without using these hydrocarbon extractions like butane, hexane, pentane, propane. But after a while, seeing a lot of these extractors advance in their fields, you started seeing many BHOs and hydrocarbon extractions coming back with no parts per million of butane. So that would show that there's barely or no trace of butane or these hydrocarbons in the oil. Now, this is something you only know when you look at test results. But seeing how far they've come, I've actually grown quite comfortable with them. And I'm not really nervous. If the process is handled well and they are transparent about their lab results, I would say you can have, fairly good confidence to consume those products safely. If you're getting it from a delivery service in New York City and it's coming with no label, I would definitely be nervous.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous. I mean, I just don't like the idea that anything that can cause cancer, even in a small dose, is going into my lungs. So I'm with you, man. I think those rosins and a rosin you can make rosin from a hair curler, which I love, or a tortilla press.
Yeah.
So amazing. No, I know. I've seen it done, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's so safe and so easy and so, in a way, natural and simple that I just think it's a great way to go. I think it's a really great way to go. And I know
if you're nervous about smoking anything cancerous, I would, any day of the week, I would choose to smoke a hydrocarbon extraction over almost any pre-filled vape pen out there, period. And all those are known to be the bottom of the barrel products, the ones that have a hard time passing testing or didn't come out too well. And then they add these dilutants that are some of the stuff you find in e-liquid that aren't even regulated yet. Those are the things that make me much more nervous than hydrocarbons and butane extraction. But
I take your point. I'm not a fan of propylene glycol or any of those glycols either. So I totally take your point. I still think it's still early days on this stuff. And even though your machines make it look absolutely beautiful and I would say even sort of glamorous, certainly compared to where it began, I like to sort of be very mindful of what I'm putting that deeply into my lungs all the time. So what's next for PuffCo? What's the next step? How many more artists can you attract to make glass for your pipes? What's the next thing you're going to be working on?
So, I feel like we're never done innovating. We're still chasing ideas that are 4 years old that we've been working very hard to bring to the public. What's next for the Peak line is definitely going to be more artist collaborations. We're working on putting on a glass art show in LA, I believe at some point in July. And we have a lot of exciting accessories coming for the PuffCo Peak. Also, hopefully, if we can get things together in time, at the end of this year, early next year, we'll have even more exciting and disruptive products coming out. And I am actually quite excited to show that to you when they're ready. I think we'll have a really, really fun conversation around them and the problems they solve.
Oh, well, listen, let's do that. Let's make that a date. We'll do another recording when you're ready towards the end of the year. You'll come to New York. We'll have a little demonstration. Or, of course, you'll just fly me out to LA for the day to see what you've got to offer.
Yeah,
how's that for
I would
a deal?
say definitely. End of the year, it's going to be freezing in New York, but I just moved from there and I still miss my home. And it's going to be nice to see winter one more time. So definitely. Or we'll bring you out here and enjoy this beautiful LA weather in December.
Well, for much to your problem, you just said that on the record, so I've got the evidence here. Roger, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Joe, both of those were fantastic conversations, but I want to break it down to let's get honest with each other here. I've had very little experience with dabs in my time, and any time that I have had the opportunity to take a dab, it's always been just too much.
Yes.
It hits like a ton of bricks, and the measuring process.
It's impossible.
I don't know how anyone can safely or reasonably do that.
It's why you need Mara Gordon and her approach and using that dipper. It's a much lighter way of doing it. So I was very afraid, all right? I mean, anybody who knows me or who's read my book knows that I had a horrendous experience with dabbing that really lasted for a long period of time, almost years. It caused me terrible vomiting, and it was like an overload of every sense in my body. So I was very wary of it for a long time. But with Mara, I have experimented using her oils, her very clean oils, cleanly extracted oils, and an instrument it's called the dipper. But the dipper it really allows you to take a tiny amount of a dab, so you can almost sip it. You don't have to take a large quantity because most of us can't measure these oils. Mm-hmm. Most of us don't know what's in them, and that is the mystery, and that is the scary part too for the people who just don't want to get that high.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot to face with somebody. The first time a dab was presented to me, the only thing I could think about was like when I was in college and doing gravity bong rips, and just how wrecked you get from taking all that straight to the head. So I would like to put out there to our listeners, like, just be smart and be safe before you dive into something you don't fully understand.
Take less.
Yeah. You can
start slow, stay low. I mean, that's actually really good advice. You can always take more. So if somebody gives you a dab the size of a sesame seed, say no. I want it to be the size of a quinoa seed.
Yeah, half that, a third of that.
Just make it smaller.
Yeah. And I think that can translate out to a lot of things. Like, we can stair step our way up, but once you've gone too far, there is no backing.
There's no going back. So just like a drink, you don't have to take the whole bottle of vodka. Have an ounce. Yeah. Start small. Start low, stay low, be happy. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Joe. We'll see you on the next show.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.